So my name is Carolyn McDonald. I'm an organisational consultant and executive coach. My background is working mostly in health, and I'm a addiction specialist, so a lot of work around behaviour change. I ran a central London drug and alcohol and food rehabilitation service, set up children and family services, worked with health tenders, changed policy, worked with the Office of, did action research with the Office of Children's Commissioner. And one of the things that I've always been really interested in is not just the individual journey, but the family journey and the organisational journey. So I've always looked at organisational support and impact. Now I work across the commercial sector and still the public sector. I teach on the Barefoot postgraduate certificate in coaching, and I'm also a supervisor for coaches, so that coaches can look at their own practice and really delve a bit deeper into where they are as an agent of change and what's happening with that. So that's a bit about me and my background, and I think it is useful to know because I'm coming at change from a slightly different perspective. So I'm hoping that what we'll do tonight will throw you all slightly off, and so that you look at your work from a 35-degree angle to the one that you normally have. Change, I think, is an integral part of the human condition, but it's one of those things that we all find difficult. If we want to do something and we do it, we go on with it. When change becomes difficult, that's when we need help and support, but it's never an easy process. Otherwise, it's a relative aspect of our own development. So today we're talking more about the parts where we encounter why change is difficult for ourselves, how that is represented in teams and organisations. So what I thought we'd sort of have an overview of the evening. I go over some context around coaching so that you know my perspective and where we're coming from, because that will be very different maybe from some of the agile stuff. Also looking at some change ideas and how that might be utilised, and then also looking at the complexity of change and the tensions and how we deal with that, and then we'll do some interactive work around bringing some of that out. So it's not all me speaking, you'll be glad to know. So, what is a coaching approach? Helping people find their own answers and owning their own solutions, thinking and acting for themselves. So there's something here from my perspective where coaching is about enabling and asking more and telling less. And I think this is one, I've just done a big piece of work all across Europe with a large tech company with the consultants, and they found the constant drive for them to tell and then thinking of themselves in a coaching space really, really difficult. They were having real problems with that tension. Listening carefully and asking open and insightful questions. I think the other thing about, I'm going to do a little bit about listening, is without really deep and active listening, we're going through a flow chart and a process. So we'll do a little bit about that. And I quite like this idea about focusing with the end in mind, so that we're beginning with the end in mind, that there is a container. It's not an open-ended discussion with coaching, so there is somewhere, and that we agree together as a coach and coachee or a coaching team what that end might be. And I think one of the things to think about is, why do we coach? And when it becomes useful is when we own it ourselves. So there's lots of research on how telling results in a quick change sometimes, and then people revert back because we have for many different reasons we might do that. We have a whole thing about the 5 a day, drinking alcohol, should we be doing that? We kind of know a lot of things around that. Does that always mean that we do it? No, just having the information doesn't mean that we transfer that into actions and behaviours. So we often know what we should be doing, and I think coaching can be very influential in that space between the knowing and the action point. And I'm going to talk a bit later about a behaviour change model that includes the not knowing aspect, and because I think that's often the place that not knowing that there is a problem, or not wanting to, or not knowing that there is a place where we can change becomes an issue. So this is one of my favourite quotes. Hearing is a physiological phenomenon, listening is a psychological art. Because to listen, we're engaging a whole range of judgments, a whole range of engagements, a whole range of filtering. We hear all the time at the moment, I'm filtering out doors, people walking around. I'm pretty focused on what's going on in here. Some people find zoning in and out of that hearing thing more difficult. My partner and my 2 children are very dyslexic, so I tend to do all my slides on grey, and I'm very aware that they have a real problem zoning out, or, you know, so if we're in the kitchen in the morning and the radio's on, my husband can't have a conversation with me because he can't go between, he can't differentiate orally between those. So it's much more difficult for him, where I can have 5 conversations going on and interact between all of them. So listening is an art, and I think with coaching and change, to really deeply listen to someone is an act of kindness and generosity. And seeing that Pivotal's tagline is always be kind, I believe that listening is the basis of that kindness, because we often listen to reply rather than listen to understand. Everyone in this room will already be thinking about what they might want to say to me, and have already stopped engaging in actually listening and thinking about what's going on for them. So, straight away, we're going to do some listening together. So, in pairs, everybody has to get in a pair together between talking and listening. Yeah? So, first person, decide who's going to speak first. The first person is going to talk for 3 minutes, and the question we're going to talk about is, what would you like to think about today? It's as open as that. What would you like to think about? The other person is not going to say anything for 3 minutes. They can nod their head, they can smile, they can body language that they are actually listening, and you're going to be the person who's listening is very, very focused on the person who's talking. You're really looking at them, you're looking for what they're saying, energy changes, are they finding this difficult? You're taking all the information in, okay? If the person completely dries up, you can ask them, what more do you think, feel, or want to say? To give them a prompt, but that's it. So you're listening and you're paying attention to your partner with warmth, and show warmth and interest. They need to know that it's not just a blank wall, because it's quite difficult actually to talk or to be listened to. Okay, is that clear for everyone?
beautiful. And I usually quite
But yeah, I thought.
So you're going to lot actually what
How was that? Did anybody really enjoy one part more than the other? Okay.
Slightly easier to listen than
Easier to listen than talk? Yeah? Anybody else listening rather than talking?
I thought it was harder to listen because I could share a lot of experiences and trying to get out of my head. Oh yeah, I feel that. So trying to clear that out of my head and really listen was hard.
So when I went first. So a couple of times I'd start thinking about what I was going to say when it came to my turn, and would have to stop myself.
Yeah.
But I was aware of that, but it was still quite hard to come back in and also not join the conversation. It's obviously natural.
Yeah.
Actually, I found it harder not to ask another question.
Yeah.
Especially since we were talking about something that was quite interesting to me too, and I was kind of no.
But was your partner quite able to speak about it?
Yeah.
He didn't need another question?
No.
Actually, I thought it was quite therapeutical to talk for a few minutes without being interrupted.
Yeah.
Which is what I ended up talking about because I realised that.
Anybody else found the talking maybe particularly uncomfortable? Yeah. So in your case here, you were quite happy talking. So who was the question for?
Oh, me, sort of like, oh, absolutely.
And then we're thinking about ourselves, and we're actually, we're not listening, we've stopped.
I was absolutely clear that sort of like it was going to be about, we were talking about film, so it was kind of like there was no other reason to know other than me. Yeah.
I just did this, we were doing something in Milan last week, and really interestingly, there were 16 people in the room, and we did that, and it sounds really like I'm being stereotypical. They were like, talking, not a problem. Listening, that was really hard. That was really hard. And then I did the same thing with the same company in London, and it was sort of half and half. Quite a lot of there was a half found speaking for 3 minutes and someone looking at them quite difficult. So in Milan it was really interesting. Nobody found it difficult to talk. Nobody. They were like, but they were all like, oh my God, it's so hard to listen. So there's cultural relationships with listening, and what does that mean, also personal ones. But I think it's really an interesting, just small moment to think about how much we engage our own thinking when we believe that we're actually listening to someone. So I did actually shorten that down from 5 minutes. Because sometimes that can be a bit too much, people start crying. I thought it's Tuesday night. Wait, what night is it? I've been away. Wednesday night, yeah, it's not Tuesday. Just want to say, listening is an active process that constructs meaning from both verbal and non-verbal messages. Did anybody notice anything that was going on? Did they notice anything that happened?
I noticed when we chatted below, you were avoiding eye contact for most of it until towards the end. You were looking down at the floor to your left most of the time while you were talking to me.
Oh, okay. Anybody else notice anything? When I was in Milan, I'd written up a flip chart, and I wrote only listening, but I left it, and then we had a discussion with the group around my language. So I had discounted listening by putting only. You know, none of us are perfect, and our language gives us away quite a lot around our inner thinking and what we believe. So there's me on my flip chart talking about listening, and I'd written only listening. So the way I got around it was a big red line around it and a star, and then we had a discussion about why I felt like I had to minimise listening. So that's just an interesting thing that you might want to think about thinking later. So I think it's just important as well that our listening, we're taking in lots of information around what's going on internally for ourselves as well as what's going on for our client. You know, are we actually listening to them and looking at all those cues? Are we taking in all the data that's been given to us? Generally no, because we're either writing something down or thinking about something else or thinking about when I can drop the next thing in that's going to make me look fantastic, and they're going to go, oh yeah, that's the answer. You know, so listening, especially in coaching, is the fundamental aspect that enables you to go beyond a transactional A to B process, I believe. So that's sort of my things. So if we think about change, we're looking at definitions. If we think of a verb, make or become different, or a noun, an act or process through which something becomes different. As agile coaches, do you think use our verbs or nouns? I wondered. Where do you see yourself? Yeah. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I was just interested. Because if you're a verb, it's an action and you see yourself as the agent of change. And I think by putting ourselves in there, in some way we are an agent of change and there's an active component. But if we think of it as a noun, it's a process that somebody else is engaged with that enables it. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong, and I think we flip in and out of that. And it's again about becoming aware of how we do that. And so I want to just unpack what we think of change. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Just shout them out around change.
Resistance.
Destruction? Oh, that was an interesting hearing. So fear.
Lack of understanding as well.
Lack of understanding?
Like if you're introducing a process and you're not clearly 100% sure it's the right process, and you don't tell the process to other people and you don't explain to them benefits, how the process can help them or help the organization.
Yeah.
And then you just go and introduce a process most people for.
Okay, so there's lack of clarity. Yeah.
Sense of loss.
Loss, fantastic. Coming from addiction background, you can't have change without loss, and we often forget to deal with the grief. Even if it's terrible, you're giving something up and you're losing a level of certainty around all change.
I think you can have two different ways. People can get in a cocoon.
Yeah.
Or people can get aggressive.
And all the way between one and the other. Yeah.
Improvement, progress.
Or the positive side. Thank you, Simon.
Towards pleasure away from pain.
Oh. Do you want to say any more about that?
So I think when we change, we kind of actively move up towards a pleasure, a greater outcome, or we change to make the pain less.
Oh, so an away from or a towards driver. Yeah. So are we driven from getting away from the terrible, destructive or uncomfortable place that we're in? Or are we thinking, oh look, the horizon is nicer over there?
And I think often the difference needs to be greater than where you are today. You either get more pleasure or you get less pain. Otherwise you don't, like, you just stay where you are.
Yeah. And also that's a really good point about thinking about that in a sort of systemic idea. We'll get onto that around, especially working with teams and where people can be. So everybody's probably seen this picture of an iceberg. I particularly like this one around development and change because it looks quite boring and nice, and that's all the behaviours on the top, but all the charge and energy is underneath the water. And what's underneath the water?
Emotions and things like that.
Yeah, our beliefs, our values, the things that actually create energy. So behaviour change is great and we can do that, but it often falls flat because all the energy and motivation is in our beliefs and our values underneath. So so I quite like that one because there's something, I don't know whether, I couldn't make up my mind whether I thought it looked threatening or full of it, or full of promise. And I think that's a bit like what we've been talking about. There's a tension between the two. And I couldn't make up my mind, so that's why I put it up there. So, if we're thinking about behaviours at the top there, and underneath we've got feelings, and then we look at beliefs, interpretations about myself, about others, and about the world. When we're thinking about teams especially, often when we're engaging with change, we've done our clarity, this is the process, this is what it's going to give us, all the behaviours are going to change for that, and all that stuff underneath the iceberg is kind of not really dealt with. And or it might be dealt with in a way that we find difficult or they find difficult, but it's there. So when we're engaging with that, I just wanted to go over this. Everybody probably know all of this about the non-directive and directive spectrum, but I just wanted to go over these fundamentals again, because it's not just about there being a spectrum, and it's not about there is a right and a wrong. It's also about being an awareness of where our tendency as an individual is when we're going in as an agent of change is on that spectrum. We all have to dance up and down the non-directive to directive aspect, but my personal inclination is to be quite far down the non-directive, quite far down this end. So I'm really happy sitting with a group of people and opening up the group for an hour. I also do reflective practice groups with no agenda apart from we're going to discuss what's going on for anybody in the room. And then we just leave it. I've been in a group where there was no talking for 45 minutes, which is quite impressive, especially that I managed not to speak for 45 minutes. So, but that's my inclination. Sometimes that's not what the team or the situation I'm in. So I have to go all the way down the directive end. But I have to be aware of myself, I have to be aware of the organisation, the team, how people are responding. So in the non-directive end, I'm down there, I'm listening, I'm giving space and time. It's led by the group or the coachee. I'm happy to meander. I'm being all nurturing. And I can stay in that space for quite a long time if it's necessary or helpful. In the directive end, I'm being a bit more information sharing. I'm doing some teaching. I'm instructing. I'm shuffling everybody along to a agreed goal. I'm leading. This is my agenda and you're going to do it. And we get into lots of feedbacks and reports. Now sometimes we think we're doing coaching and we're instructing. And then we wonder why people get annoyed with us. So I wanted just to bring that back up again around that. It's a really basic, easy thing.
Do you think that actually within a coaching, not necessarily in an individual session, but maybe a longer term assignment, you need to switch between those two and sort of like...
Or even in one session I might be running up and down that line.
And do you think it's easier to go one way than the other?
I think the problem comes if you don't have a self-awareness of where your tendency tends to be. So if you don't know where your anchor is or where you tend to feel most comfortable, you end up there by default. And then moving out of that and meeting what the need that the coach or the team has becomes more difficult, is my view of it. The ease of going up and down the spectrum is linked to understanding where your own knowledge base is and then becoming conscious of that. So I have to be conscious that I'm not, over here just, making everybody think for themselves and be really owning their own stuff and uncovering what's the major deep drivers of their life, when actually the contract is something quite different. So yeah. And if we think about our non-directive routes to change, we're thinking collaboration, evocation and autonomy. And I bet you that we think that that's what you do quite a lot. I'd be surprised. Where do people think? Do they think that they're collaborative? They evoke information from their people. They give people autonomy. Yeah.
I think often people do it for their own benefit, not for the benefit of others. So for me personally, I'm quite collaborative.
Yeah.
But often I try to get my collaborative need met for me, not for the other person. And it's maybe the same for some of these other things, maybe.
Yeah, and I think also we often think we might be down there because that's what we want to see ourselves as, and actually we're often quite far down this end. But and these are quite easy things just to think about. You create an atmosphere that is conductive rather than coercive and build on that partnership. The client has the resources and motivation to change, and you evoke this. You believe that they've got the ability to change and the resources to enable themselves to do that. And the client has capacity for self-direction, and you respect and affirm that. But often, we're actually really playing out, not often, but often we can fall into a pattern. Sometimes we can fall into a pattern of you have to impose the reality of the situation. So it's a confrontation rather than a collaboration. We think we're being collaborative, but actually they don't really know, so we have to tell them. We think we're being, evocative around that, but we're actually telling and going into a teaching role. and this is going back to the thinking about the listening. We often go back. Evocation, you're listening, and education, you're speaking. And I've done this as a sort of more, right down then, so you're forcing on the education, and instead of the client having autonomy and taking it forward, you're the authority and you tell them what they must do. So I think it's just important that we go back and think about this when we're discussing change, to think about ourselves in this and where what we take into the room and our beliefs around change, our beliefs about who we are, and then reflecting on that and looking at the evidence and the outcomes and thinking, am I really that collaborative? Or do I just want people to do what I tell them? It's like if you have children, you go through a stage where they can't tie their shoelaces. So how long do you go through helping to teach them to tie their shoelace so that they go away and do it themselves? Or how long do you just tie the shoelaces in the morning and get them out the door? And there's a real tension in how much we engage and listen and enable, and how much we just want the job done. And it's not, again, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, I'm saying it's a whole spectrum, and we engage in that all the time, but it's about being aware of when we're doing it, why we're doing it, and therefore what the outcomes are going to be. Who are we doing it for? Ultimately, is this to meet my need? Am I getting this because everybody's saying yes? So this is a health change model. There's hundreds of change models. I've even made up my own change model, which I haven't done. Mine is called ADAPT. But this is a cycle of change. It's been around since '83. It started in addiction, but it's used right across the health sector. And I thought I'd bring it along because what it does is it makes visible that change is a process, a non-linear process, and there's a whole range of different places that we sit in it. So if we start at the top, we've got pre-contemplation, and I use this sometimes now also with teams. So pre-contemplation, there'll be a team member who doesn't think there is a problem. There is no problem. So there's no intention of changing because there isn't a problem. Then there's a contemplation point. So they might be aware that it's a problem because it might impinge a little bit on them, but really there's not any commitment to become involved in making a difference to that. Then there's the preparation part. So, okay, there is a problem, and I am intent to do something about that. I'm going to do something about that. And actually, quite a lot of us stay in that quite a lot about most things. Oh yeah, no, I'm going to do that run, and I'm going to download that app, and I'm going to do it. And that can go on for quite a long time. Then we can move into action. That's when we move into the actioning our behaviours. So all the pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, that's all our feelings and our beliefs. That's all below the surface stuff that's going on. You know, our needs, our feelings, what we believe about ourselves and the world. So we don't often see or think about that. Actions, we're acting out, we're making concrete those changes in our life. Maintenance is what structures and support, cultural, social, work structures do we need to carry on that change? So preparation, we stay a long time there. Action, there's a burst. And then we move on to maintenance. This is another point where things can go awry. So we've done the change, everything's changed, we started doing our jogging, it's all lovely, and then everything changes around us. We don't have any other structures, all we've got is a little app on the phone, and we haven't joined a jogging group, we haven't told anybody we're doing this, whatever it makes to continue that maintenance on. And in a team, that's often the point where people, we were talking about earlier, buying in a massive piece of software, thinking it will change everything. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and then no onward maintenance to ensure that anything actually continues with that. So what happens then? Then we go back into a relapse, we go back to our old behaviours. There's not a problem anymore, and we go round. The thing that's quite nice about the Francesca and De Clemente one is that it's not that any of this is bad. It's like, where are we on this? And then when we're working with teams, it can be quite useful for thinking what interventions are needed. Often at pre-contemplation and contemplation, we go in, there's a team, there's people who don't see there's being a problem, and what we do is we give them lots of skills training and information, completely useless, because there isn't a problem. So you're giving them lots of information and skills to meet a need that isn't there. So how do you enable the pre-contemplation and contemplation people to see the need, to be able to engage with the preparation, which is the skills and learning aspect? So it's just a way of kind of breaking down how change often gets stuck in these, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, or there's thousands of change programs. I just find this one's really easy to understand, non-linear, and it really does take into consideration the aspect of the pre-contemplation, contemplation and preparation aspect. So in addiction work, the pre-contemplation and contemplation is about uncovering what the problem is, what the behaviour is enabling, what the impact of that carries on for someone, and how to motivate them, where's their intrinsic motivation for that change. And if you can engage with that, then you can bring in skills and techniques. You might do some actioning behaviour stuff to make them feel safe and learning, but generally that comes in the preparation area. But often in our organisation, we go in and thinking everybody's at preparation or action, and then throw lots of information and resources that don't really hit the people who don't think there is a problem, and then they become like the treacle to the wheels of change. Things become slowed down, then the other people move round the cycle, and then everything can really stop in worst case scenario.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you spend much time in a relapse, understanding what led to that relapse and those kind of things?
Yeah,
that feels like a good place to start, because I think organisations go through relapses.
Exactly.
Often quite slightly longer than individuals, it feels.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So for me, that's about some of the stuff around reflective practice or triple loop learning, really, and thinking about how that organisation understands themselves, what's led them to that, and also what do they get out of going back into that place. Going back to the thing about grief, we've also often not dealt with what they have to give up, whether it's a sense of self as an organisation. Sometimes you go in and I do, say, some culture change work. Oh, we're all going to do this and everybody's going to feel better. And there's quite a lot of people that were like, but I felt like I really loved the brand I work for, It was great. And there's all these people going, oh, and it's only going to be even greater now. And you're like, no, but I really like that bit. And then you'll go through a culture change thing, and then the vast majority of staff were happier previously and feel that something's been taken away from them rather than given to them. I think often that's at the heart of a big relapse into organisational structures. But yeah, I think you're right, often not enough reflection and moving straight to preparation and action. So that's trying to give you a different way of looking at change, about behaviour change, also bringing in an idea of the cyclical aspect, not seeing it as wrong. You know, those relapses can be really helpful and engaging. So you can go from relapse back into preparation and action. You don't have to go all the way round. So this is just a different way of trying to expand our thinking around change and where we are. So as I said, the Francesca and Di Clemente stage of change model has been around in healthcare since about 83. It's actually one component of a thing called the trans-theoretical model of behaviour change. Great title, so snappy. Which includes a range of other interventions that you would use at different points on the cycle. So it's about, again, that's why I think it's really simple but quite interesting in the idea that each part needs something else rather than one thing will take you all the way through. There is some criticism that is too simplistic, but that's the criticism of every model. And change is a process, it's not linear. Change is not an event. It's something that continues on. So I think in working practice organisationally, why would I bring this up, the cycle of change? I think what's useful about it is it makes a very visual thing, very simply visual, that the idea that change is difficult and keeps it alive in our minds. So if we're working from thinking about it, we have to think, oh, not everybody is finding this easy. Where are they on that? Just a little sense check. Where am I on that? Am I pushing down the directive line? Well, 3 people over here don't even think there's a problem. What's the tension then that's created from that? Yeah, so they'll be distributed across the change spectrum. My belief and my evidence of working with many people who have struggled with doing deep change and changing behaviours and ways of life is motivation is integral, and I think it's the thing, you know, linking back. Is my life so awful now that changing it will be better? Or is my life so awful now, but the thought of change and being in something else is so terrifying, I would rather just keep doing this? And actually, a lot of us spend a lot of time in that place. You know, I know this. If I go for a walk with my partner and we leave the house and we're going somewhere that I normally walk on my own, and then we go together and he starts to go a different way, I'm like, where are you going? He said, well, I'm going this way. I'm going, but I go this way. I always go this way. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We're pattern orientated, and these patterns become grooved in. Change is difficult. I'm not on the, oh, change is easy. No, it's not. It's really hard. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Coming back to motivation is integral to long-lasting change.
Yeah.
How do you actually motivate individuals within the team? Who don't actually know it?
Who, sorry?
Who don't like change.
Who don't like change, exactly, yeah. So this is a way of thinking, what do they need? What's either their biggest fear or anxiety? how can that be met in some way to enable them to find their own motivation? So sometimes there's a bit of uncovering, and if we are not aware of our own motivations and change, then that becomes really hard to do, because then our internal voices shoot what their needs might be. And also the difficult thing about working with teams is motivation varies across a team. You know, and some people, like, at different points in their life, I've been really engaged with change. I've been a CEO of a company and went through lots of change, and I merged it with a different company. That was very difficult for me. I had to give up lots. Luckily, I'm quite a systems-focused person, so I could think collectively, and my needs were met because I felt that this was the best thing to do for the collective. So even though it was difficult for me, it was less difficult than it might have been, because my integral, really important value for me as a collective integral was met through that merger, even though I lost my job, I lost my role, I had to go to a different role, and then what did that mean? So again, for some people, that would just feel very, I spoke to someone else, and I've worked with people doing mergers, and you have to be aware of where your role is in a team as well. What role do you take? How important is that role to you? How much does it define who you are? What do you link with that? There's lots going on. So now we get to, so lots going on. This is one of my favourite views. Does anybody know what it's called?
Sitting alone.
Is that it?
The birds
Yeah.
flying over a room, they make clouds.
Yeah. Does anybody know what the cloud's called? The grouping? Murmuration. I wanted to call my company that. But then I thought nobody will understand what it is, and I have to explain it all the time. I'm stupid. But I love that word as well, murmuration, because it's also like, you know, they make a noise when they do it. Well, now I'm going to have to do my clip.
Ron Swanson.
Chris, you have come up with a plan so spectacularly horrible that it might ruin the entire department.
No, wait a minute.
No, I mean that as a compliment. So it pains me to say this. My department has to go back to the way it was.
Give them time. They'll adjust.
No, they won't. They're miserable. Tom only performs when there's someone to impress, so marooning him on Freak Island isn't helping anyone. And you made April assistant to everyone? You know who April hates? Everyone. And Jerry can only function if no one's looking. You shine a light on him and he shrinks up faster than an Eskimo scrotum.
Well, that's very perceptive, Ron, and very graphic. I understand your point, but there's no way that I could just roll over on this.
Okay. You won't ever hear me say this again, so savor this moment. I may have a compromise.
Look.
So did that look, or did that bring up any known experiences? I love that call. For me, I've done lots of things where I've gone in, changed organisations, been brought in to troubleshoot. That, to me, that was my life for about 5 years. So I've done lots of work with people, and there's an idea that you come in and make all these changes and everybody's happy. You know, it is very complex. So, and what we get with organisations at the moment, we seem to have a huge amount of conflicting ideas. There's often very mixed messages. You know, innovate, avoid mistakes, think long term, deliver results now, cut costs, increase morale, reduce staff, improve teamwork, be flexible, respect the rules. Collaborate, compete. Decentralise, retain control. Specialise, be opportunistic. And low cost but high quality. So those, to me, don't make sense. But we say them all the time, and when you're on the other side of them, I've done pitches where I've been making massive reductions in cost of a budget and told everybody it's going to increase morale and teamwork's going to be much more efficient, and they're all thinking, no, it's not. So how do we deal with that level of tension as agents of change? So on this, you're going to do something together soon. One of my views is that change happens individually but becomes a force collectively. Getting a team to work together is much more impressive, effective, and enabling than having lots of individual people doing something for themselves. So we're going to do a thing together on the tables. Okay, yeah. There's a sheet of paper on each table and some pens. The World Cafe is a way of interacting. It's up online, it's open source information, and I've got at the end there's a little references slide. So what the ideas of World Cafe is to use a process that can help people surface some of those competing and opposing ideas and tensions. So this is a way of helping with teams or things that are in change to bring these out so that they can actually be discussed. One of the problems is with change is that we often go round it and we don't want to deal with those bits, and then it's kind of like all that stuff under the iceberg. So if we can find ways that feel safe enough to bring out some of these ideas, then we can hopefully deal with it, or at least recognise it. We may not be able to change it, but at least it's out. So we set the context, we create a hospitable space, which has been done here. Explore questions that matter. So this is important when we're doing this because it has to mean something to people to get them actually engaged. Encourage everyone's contribution. So at the table, if everyone, when we start the process, can also, some people talk more and some people are quieter, but if everyone can contribute so that all the voices, quieter and louder, are heard, that would be really fantastic. So it's also about connecting diverse perspectives, because what this enables us to do is find an idea where we're looking at how we think differently and respond differently. We're listening again, so going back to the initial aspect, and we're sharing collective discoveries. So the World Cafe guidelines are up here. It's about doing it in a more less pressurised environment, but still structured and respectful. So how do we hold these opposing ideas alongside each other? So normally you might do this for, say, half an hour, 40 minutes each time, but we're just doing a sort of taster. So it'll be 10 minutes in our tables. Our question, since we've been dealing with change, is what does change mean to us individually, or as an agile coach, or organisationally, something that means something to the people here. We can listen, we should be listening, writing, drawing. Some people like to draw, some people can just write a word that represents the complexity of the thinking and feelings on each table, so that everybody's ideas responses get noted down. After 10 minutes, all but one person leaves the table and joins another table. And then we will have another 10 minutes and continue the discussion with the piece of paper that's on the table. So the person who's left is the host, and they can explain as much as they want or as little as they want. They are hosting, they do it their way. Okay? Is that clear? Does that make sense? Yeah? And then at the end, we'll come together and review what that was like, and also see if there's any themes or visuals that have come out of the different pieces of paper. So here, just to make the groups, can I get you to come down? That'd be really helpful. Thank you. Because then we have enough. Then we have 4 groups. Super. You don't have to have a consensus on one around what
I guess you self-serve, if you discuss it, you self-serve. And you have to hold ideas. Brick wall.
No pressure, they were all watching me.
It's great.
The change manager started adding processes without any communication, and then she didn't give any time to people to learn the processes, to understand why she's adding the new process.
Sad face, yeah. Is that enough to...
Do you have a place? The flowers kind of growing and becoming bigger.
The change you're proposing isn't actually delivering value for them.
Look at quote by Henry Ford. If you asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse.
Constant state of people Russia, high pressure, I think of.
That's 10 minutes. If we put the
one of the things that is
pieces of paper, pieces of paper at the end of each of the tables. Pieces of paper to the different groups, what's come up. This is, we're finished. No more for me. What I wanted to hear, what did you think of that as a way of thinking? What did you think of when you looked at how people had represented things differently? What happened when you went back to the one that you started on?